Welcome to the Culture of You, meaningful dialogue with me and my favorite people. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us at the Culture of You. Today, I have one of my favorite people in the world, yep, that's you. All right, so we got Ken Schneck, a professor of education, a journalist, a radio voice, what else? Editor of the Buckeye Flame, and my petty bestie, and my favorite gay Jew. So welcome, Ken. Did I miss anything?
How long is the list of gay Jews that I'm at the favorite? Are there tons? It's not a long list, was it?
There's not. There's not. Welcome. You're still my favorite.
Yay! I'm putting that on my LinkedIn. Awesome. It's already there.
It's already there.
It's already there.
Immediately updated. All right, cool.
Endorsements.
Did I miss anything? Anything you want to, publicly pronounce in this moment?
I got 2 cats.
Oh yeah. They don't show up in like screen or anything.
They don't. I perhaps need to feed them differently than I am feeding them. So at the current moment, they would not be able to leap as high as this desk is.
So they're thriving, is what I hear you saying.
They're doing great. They're doing really well.
All right, we won't go into any jokes there. All right, so Culture of You, can just give me a quick explanation of why you were eager and willing to come on this show with me.
I am obsessed with you. It's a known fact. We first encountered each other for a piece, I think it was for Prism, on parenting. I think it was on parenting.
It was, which is interesting because I don't have children.
Yeah, but it was on parenting and you gave some great quotes, so thanks for that. I don't remember exactly what it was. And then, and I just remember we had that conversation. I am almost positive that I recorded that when I was in a car. I was parked somewhere, and I just remember it being a really great conversation. And then when Prism died in March, for folks who don't know, Prism was Ohio's at the time only LGBTQ publication.
RIP.
RIP. And when that went under in March of 2020, I called a buddy of mine here in Cleveland and said, I don't think that Ohio can not have an LGBTQ publication. And she immediately said, well, then let's just start it as a 501c3. And if we're a 501c3, then we need a board. And so that it really happened within, I would say, 48 hours. And you said yes, really, really quickly. And I mean, yes, I adore all of our conversations. But I've also learned so much from you, and have ignored just as much when you have just great advice. And I'm like, I'm not ready for that. And so, yeah, of course I'm going to leap at this opportunity. I am a little bit of a podcast nut job as well. I am a longtime podcaster. I had a show for about 10 years. And so I love supporting everybody's pursuits in the podcast realm.
I mean, you really had me at obsessed with me. But thank you for all that additional context.
Just kept going after that, yeah.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate it. Let the people know, what is our relationship. And I appreciate that context. We finally got to meet in person. I think it was last year. In 2022, we finally got to meet early in the year. I didn't realize how tall you were.
I knew that was coming.
Well, I didn't realize how tall you were. And I think we should put like our heights, maybe not like, maybe our pronouns and our heights. I don't know how like big that box, will continue to grow, but maybe put our heights in there because we just see each other in little boxes all the time.
Is that interesting though? Because I get that comment a lot when people meet me for the first time in person. And so I'm always curious, like what I convey here, because you and I have a mutual acquaintance who, when I met her, I thought, okay, well, she's easily 5'10" or 5'11". And she was not. She was a tiny little thing, Siobhan. And so
Uh-huh.
like, it's just always interesting to think about like what people convey in this box that somehow we correlate to height.
Maybe it's energy or like how we
Yeah,
show up, but I also didn't expect you not to be tall either.
okay, I'll
I
take
don't
it.
know. I didn't have any expectation, but I was like, oh wow, you're like tall, tall.
Yeah, and then
Cool.
you got really nervous, which I respected, just about like, oh, am I going to be able to beat him in one-on-one? And yeah,
Right.
I felt that fear. I know it.
We've known that horse, like I got you. But the joints, the way my joints are set up these days, you might have me in the one-on-one. And that's we'll keep it there. All right, cool. So thank you for joining me. Thank you for telling me all the reasons why you joined. And then how do you define culture,
Mm. Yeah,
professor?
culture has always been a struggle word for me. So yeah, so I should tell people, I in my professor life, I write largely, well, I write, but I also teach largely around diversity in higher ed, and multiculturalism in higher ed. And so it's a concept that we struggle with quite a bit, happily, like good trouble struggle, with our students to define it as we're trying to, support students' identity development, right? That's a
Hmm.
big piece about what it is that I teach. So I have that realm. And then we also have kind of the Buckeye Flame journalist realm, which is so based on LGBTQ culture, um, and certainly hopefully from an intersectional lens. But then I also have my personal, which is growing up in a Jewish culture, and not necessarily, ooh, my parents won't like this, but not necessarily a Jewish religion. I am much more connected to the Jewish culture than I am to the Jewish religion. That's a big thing that I'm struggling with, like right now struggling with, and I know that that's going to be my next huge writing project, is really exploring what it means to be connected to a Jewish culture, but not a Jewish religion. So it's kind of a long-winded way of avoiding your question and saying that
Right.
there's socialization aspects to it, there's family aspects to it. Um, in Judaism, it's kind of interesting because most would not argue that culture is necessarily biological, but with Judaism, with the theory that is passed down through the mother, that
Hmm.
if your mother is Jewish, then you are indeed Jewish, and where culture plays into that. Yeah, this is one of my favorite topics to not answer because I just struggle with it openly and, obsessively.
Well, I could have led with this, but working definition I have is from Javier Sanchez and Reach Strategies, and that's culture, traditions, language, and rituals.
Yeah.
And so that's like the through line, right? So every space we go into has a culture. We have our own culture that we curate and create, and our different diversity dimensions uniquely and intersectionally probably have uh specific cultures.
Mm,
Ohio has a culture, right?
mm.
So like thinking about what are the customs, traditions, language, and rituals that we have in all those spaces that define that culture. I could have led with that for you, maybe.
I loved it. I loved hearing it after I gave my bumbling answer. Yeah.
Fair. All right. So, how would you personally, and I will put this out into like personally, professionally. Okay. So,
Mhm.
how would you describe yourself as a vibe? Because to me, vibe is your culture personally. Culture is kind of like the professional answer and the diversity, ethnic, racial answer, whatever.
Yeah.
So, how would you describe yourself as a vibe? I'm really excited about this answer.
Uh, I mean, I'm definitely pretty snarky. Like my vibe is pretty snarky. I would like to believe that I'm pretty quick. I grew up in a family where, so I'm the youngest of four,
Mhm.
and so you had to get it out there fast, or you were not getting out on the table.
Yes.
And so I competing for that space in the way that we did, and then growing up right outside of New York City, I grew up in New Jersey, and so I always think that's kind of a vibe in itself, and it's one that I've only recently started owning. I for years and years I was just telling people like, oh yeah, 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 no, I'm from the New York City area. No, I'm not. I am from New Jersey. I am
What
proud.
part?
Bergen County, and that's really specific too because it's north of New York City. So that when people are like, "Yeah, I'm from Southern New Jersey," I'm like, "Yeah, that's gross." So so I'm really specific about the Northern New Jersey. The people who grew up behind us, like the house behind our house,
Mhm.
those people lived in New York. We
Mm.
were literally on the border of New Jersey and New York. And then I moved into New York City when I was 18 and did my undergrad, my master's, and my PhD there, and just kind of navigating gay culture in New York City in the mid to late 90s, a little
Mhm.
bit past HIV and AIDS devastation, but not that much past. I think that definitely lends to my vibe of kind of being obsessed with uh, LGBTQ culture in a way that's really important because it could go away. So
Mm.
that always lent a sense of urgency. I think that a lot of my vibe is a sense of urgency. The drawback is that there are times when it really shouldn't be.
Is that
Uh,
like sans the white supremacy or not?
it's always woven in throughout that. So I don't think we can disambiguate those two. But yeah, I think there are times where I actually probably need to feel a little bit less of a sense of urgency.
I love that. And for a fun, like full circle border story, I at one point had an apartment that my garage was in Bexley and my
Really?
apartment was in Columbus. So thankfully, I got Columbus taxes with the benefits of the Bexley neighborhood if I wanted to walk across the street.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, no, I never worked in New Jersey. All of my jobs from Bagel Ridge when I was 16 and 17 years old, which I would go back to in a heartbeat.
Mhm.
Those were always in New York. I taught tennis. I've been teaching tennis since I was 16 years old. And so all my tennis teaching jobs, everything was always in New York. I never once even worked in New Jersey, but that is my homeland.
Is there a tax agreement between New York and New Jersey? Because there's one between Ohio and Kentucky.
I always was fascinated that you had to pay tolls to get into New York, but never to get into New Jersey. And I'm always like, what the hell? Like, why aren't we charging? It should be an honor to come here as well. But that was always just kind of some interesting messaging of it doesn't
Mhm.
cost anything to come here. And it wasn't because we were welcoming, because we weren't. Yeah. I'm curious about the taxes piece, but the tolls was that Garden State Parkway was a big deal.
That's hilarious. I spent a lot of time in New York and New Jersey because I played in the Northeast Conference at St. Francis University in Pennsylvania, and we played Monmouth
Mama, yeah.
and St. Francis, New York. And I'm trying to think who else was in that area. We
I don't
played
know
Long
St. Francis,
Island.
New York. That one I
It's
don't know.
it's in Brooklyn
Oh, okay.
and then Long Island. And so we would have like weekends. So we would go up there and I had teammates from New Jersey or area. And we would go to their houses and stuff like that. So they were Eagles people, so
No, no, no,
I
no.
yeah.
That's
Well,
not.
their dad like is Lem Burnham. Like he played for the Eagles. And
Oh.
so my friend Shannon, we would go to her house and they were delightful.
I grew up with Christy Crenell. The Crenells, her dad was
Mhm,
Romeo Crenell,
mhm.
who was the head coach of the Browns and the Kansas City Chiefs. But at the time, he was the defense coach of the Giants. So it was
Oh,
always about the Giants growing up, not really the Jets, occasionally the Mets, more often the Yankees. And then
mhm.
oddly, the Devils, the New Jersey Devils were
Okay.
always in the mix.
Y'all love hockey.
I really don't.
You know who I mean when I say y'all. Anyway, all right. So now how would you describe your culture that you create? You're a facilitator, a fantastic facilitator.
Mm.
I really enjoy your facilitation. Um, what would you say you create or try to create intentionally around culture in the spaces that you're facilitating, teaching, or even journalism if you want to delineate between the three?
Yeah, I think with the facilitating one is maybe the easiest for me to answer because I think I'm pretty keyed into whatever I'm saying being useful and increasing people's confidence. usually through figuring out what their brand is. And I even hate using the word brand because it's so buzzwordy, but one of the sentences, and I actually don't love cheesy things. And so the fact that I say this cheesy thing all the time means I really believe in it. A lot of the workshops that I do are around how can people use their voices to make a difference, right? Like that's, but not just like feel like you're making a difference, actually making a difference. I have no interest in having more meetings about having more meetings, but what can you actually do to move the needle forward? And so a lot of what I do in that realm is how do you present yourself differently? How do you present your social justice issue differently? How do you present your organization differently than all the other organizations? Brings us to the cheesy sentence that there are a ton of people doing what it is that you do, right? Karen, hopefully not a revelation. Yours is not the only podcast.
No,
right?
it's not.
There, hold on, there's a back half of this and scene, right? So that wasn't confidence boosting. So there are a ton of people who do what it is that you do, semicolon, but you are the only one who does it in the way that you do it. And I really believe that. Like that you have to go in knowing that there's a lot of people competing for space. And this is in all sectors. This is in the job market. This is in the social justice space. This is in the nonprofit administration. This is in the dating space, right? Like in all of the spaces, there are a ton of people doing what it is that you do in the space. The trick is, and this is what my facilitation is really focused on, and in some ways my writing, how do you articulate the way that you do it that nobody else does it? And people come back and say like, oh, you know, I'm just different. Cool story. Name it. Like, I want to actually hear it. And I only want to hear it in an elevator pitch because none of us have time. We don't have time to hear like your long pitch. Like, I just need like 75 words tops. How can you succinctly, without buzzwords, say, this is what I do differently than everybody else. This is what my nonprofit does differently than everybody else. Here's a rally that's going on this weekend. Cool. There's 6 other rallies this weekend. What does your rally do that the other ones don't do? And so that's what I'm pretty focused on, is that, yes, there is a confidence piece, and I want people to increase their confidence in what they're putting out there to the world. But I also believe that the way to actually do that is to run through the elevator pitch and be able to succinctly articulate what it is that you do differently than everybody else. And that's my obsession. I have had to work at that for me, and it changes based on the audience. It changes based on what I'm working on, right? Like, my books are way different than the Buckeye Flame, which is way different than hosting a burlesque show. These are all different things. And so I have different elevator pitches, but it's first acknowledging there's other people doing this thing and then saying, okay, but how is it that I do it differently than everybody else? But I know I keep returning to it, but not in a headspace way. This is not a thing like, oh, that's a really interesting concept. No. Actually do it. Like, you actually have to say it and articulate it in a way that I'm going to remember later on.
This is a good segue because, you know, my one sentence pitch is, you know, supporting people and becoming the lover, friend, leader that they want to be. And so let's move into the realm of relationship. And what's your elevator pitch there? I mean, I'm all about the matchmaking and making sure my friends get the love they deserve. And so let's make a quick pitch for you in relationship. Ken, what do you do? And who are you that is different than what all these other maybe Tinder offers are giving?
Yeah, I mean, my mom says I'm awesome. And so there's that. Yeah, I mean, I get off on interactions. Like, I do like just vegging on the couch, right? And I need to be able to just zone out and watch a series together. But I also, like, we're gonna have fun at a dinner because we're gonna talk about different stuff and we're gonna be laughing, and I don't think communication is that hard. And so that's why I'm always kind of, I really don't. I don't, and that's why I'm so incapacitated when
you're a writer. Of course you don't think it's hard. The world struggles with this.
Ah,
And if the world didn't struggle with this, Ken, you would almost be out of business as a facilitator, because people don't know and don't have the confidence to know like what they offer or who they are, that, delineates them or separates them or elevates them outside of a certain theme or sector in their work. Like, you wouldn't be necessary if communication was like, you wouldn't have a publication if communication was
can we
good.
go with some middle ground? Let's go with some middle ground. Yeah, I'm all for the middle ground right now in saying like, I get that it can be difficult for people, but there's got to be a middle ground between whatever it is that I do and say ghosting, right? Like there's got to
Okay.
be something in the middle of, hey, I'm just unavailable right now and I'm not comfortable telling you why, or maybe someone will say, oh, it's the tattoos, they don't work for me. Cool. You're not comfortable saying that. That's totally fine. And so there's got to be a middle ground of before you ghost. I am becoming quite the ghosting connoisseur. It's
Is that
someone
because you're receiving ghosting or because you are ghosting?
100% receiving it. Yes, yes, yes. It
Boo.
has notes of forlornness and desperate. Yeah.
Aw.
So it is what it is. I'm starting to see the humor in it. I mean, I guess that's part of my vibe, is that, look, if you're gonna keep doing this, did I mention I'm gay? Totes gay. If
Okay.
they're gonna keep doing this, I'm still gonna have more and more material for these stand-up shows. So it works out for me. And you better not come to a future show, people who have ghosted me, because it's not great.
That's the thing they say about artists. They say, if you don't want to be part of our material, then you should really be intentional about how you treat us,
Yeah, yeah.
because you are
So yeah,
definitely
no,
a poem or a line in my improv comedy or something.
I'm a nice Jewish doctor. Yeah. It's interesting that like, and I've been downplaying some of that lately. And I have a joke that I always tell that like my three main criteria are employed, not on
Breathing.
meth,
Oh, not on that. Yeah.
and ideally likes me. And I found some combinations of those three, but not the holy grail of all three.
Mm.
And so I probably should up those standards a little bit, but I do just love meeting new people and having great conversations with them. But yeah, I'm also the dork who's looking for something more. Wah, wah.
Well, I don't think that makes you a dork. I think that makes you clear on what you want. And I love a good reframe. So I think that makes you clear on what you want. And I hope that in due time, my friend, you find what you're looking for there. That's
Through
that's
this
a
podcast.
You said what?
Through this
Through
podcast.
this podcast, yes.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
always tell people, like, if you are looking for you're looking at this podcast and you're like, seems like a really interesting guy. Hit me up. I'll vet you, and I'll see what your communication style is. I'll make you make promises in blood, and then we'll see how it goes.
Columbus is not off the table for me, folks.
All right. Well, that is good to know. Anywhere else in Ohio that is not off the table?
Cincinnati feels a little far. Is that
It's
but except it's not. I had for most of 2021, I was in a relationship with a gent in Buffalo, and that was a good 3 hours. A nice rabbi who again disappeared and ghosted me. So that was a fun year. But yeah, distance doesn't, I think my whole thing with distance, it doesn't, I didn't think it was something that I could ever do until that Buffalo experience. And it's just about like making sure that you have plans coming up at some
Mhm.
point. You always have something to look forward to. And
Yes,
it worked out just fine for me until again.
the ghosting.
Yeah. And I need
Yikes.
to stop with that. Let me add criteria 4. We do need to stop with the clergymen.
Oh, yeah.
The men of God perhaps have not worked out in my
I
favor.
mean, maybe make it like men who are not still seeking God in their clergy-ness. Because I think, like therapists, everybody gets in their vocation probably because of a deep inner need. to understand themselves more. So we have to see what part of their journey they're on, if they're going to be clergy.
Can we just say non-clergy? Are there not
I'm down.
enough?
I'm down for whatever specifications you want to be. This is your matchmaking experience. I really want you to have what you want. And it's okay if the criteria is complex and nuanced. But we can definitely take clergy out of the equation. Just
Yeah.
no. I took Geminis out of the equation. You know what I mean? And they're
Wow.
they're great friends. They're fantastic friends, but I couldn't do it. I
I feel
couldn't
like
I
I need to
couldn't
know
do
more
it.
about my sign. What if I'm off people's lists because of my sign?
I love all the professional development assessments because it gives me really clear looks into like my learning style, my communication style, my strengths. If I do strength finders, the disc, how I'm going to be in a situation where I need to lead or project drive. The Phoebe talks about energy and where I get my energy in work. And the astrology piece, but you also have to know their like rising and moon sign and all of that stuff. And if you get into it, now I got a wife who does that stuff. So if you get into it, we'll pull some cards for you. We got to see what's
Oh, I'm
going on
ready.
in the ethers in the astrology. What is your sun sign? When were you born?
The year or the month?
No, the month.
Okay, listen. February
February what?
20th. I'm a Pisces.
Okay.
I'm like the first day of Pisces.
Right. So you're on the cusp.
Yeah, so I swim away from danger.
Okay. So there's some there's some water vibes that definitely are interesting. And February Pisces are different than March Pisces.
Oh, I don't talk to March Pisces.
Well, my father's a March Pisces and my sister's a March Pisces. So I'm surrounded by Pisces. So I have a lot of love for Pisces.
Yeah, Brandon Chapman is a day past me.
Okay, yeah, I got a lot of love for all the Pisces in my life. Y'all are specific. I mean, there's a specific chart. I would love to do your chart and just see what comes up and where your, I don't know, 12th house is in. I don't know,
What
whatever.
do you need to know? Do you just need to know like the time
I
that you
need to
were
know the
born?
location,
I know
the
the location.
date, the time. Yeah, we'll send that to me. We'll email that to me and we'll do a follow-up. We'll
This is
do a
very exciting.
follow-up discussion
I did
on all
Strengths
of that and
Finder
who you
once.
attract. Yeah.
Yeah, I did Strengths Finder. I think it said I was like a hunter gatherer. I don't remember. I didn't.
What?
I
Okay,
don't
so
know.
mine are like achiever, of course, because I'm like a workaholic. But achiever, I think individualization, which I love that one because that means that I look at people as individuals and can
Okay.
have that nuance and context there. I think woo's in there somewhere. But there's lots of strengths. I'd be interested in your strength finder now, maybe
I haven't done
after.
it. I haven't done it in a minute. I haven't done Myers-Briggs in a minute either.
Yeah, that's a good one too. Lots of good assessments. And we're probably assessment junkies. So I'd be your
Yeah.
PI. I want to know your predictive index, all those can be factored in. And like we gotta get it out there. We're gonna manifest it right now. This conversation is manifesting you a solid communicative relationship.
Okay. To tell you, my mom her needed to have her gallbladder out of nowhere
Mhm.
last month, and it made her think about mortality, which is not the space that my mom ever needs to be in because
Right.
she goes down,
Spiraler.
she spirals. And so
Mhm.
she called me. Did I tell you this? She called me and she said, I've been thinking about my life. Uh-huh. What's up, mom? Your dad and I had a conversation and we've come to a decision. Okay, what is it? She said, no, it's about you. Yes. What is this amazing thing that you're gonna tell me, mom? What is it? She said, well, we both decided like you really need to find someone. Okay, I
You
know.
think?
This is
Thanks,
the
mom.
thing. This is what she came to. So I'm aware. Thank you,
All
mom.
right. Well, I hope that happens for you. And if not, you have lots going on. So let's get into that. Let's talk a little conflict. All right.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of anti-trans legislation. I think we're up past 340 nationally. We definitely have our own uh, in Ohio, our own
Mhm.
legislation that's being presented in Ohio. Um, 5, yeah. So as or 4, as we're talking about conflict, not necessarily in the ghost. I think we understand how you deal with the ghost. You like move on and do what you have to do.
Yeah.
But how are you handling conflict and like the version of yourself or your favorite version of yourself that you want to be versus how sometimes this work and this advocacy space can make you like really activated and triggered in your nervous system. How are you handling conflict right now?
This is where my mind immediately went. I used to be on Baldwin Wallace used to have this, which is where I work, where I'm a professor, used to have a diversity committee, the Diversity, Integration, and Inclusion Committee, which was a horrible acronym because you would just be like, I'm going to the Dick Committee. And listen, we're not the acronym.
We gotta.
So I was on that committee for 3 or 4 years, and I was losing my freaking mind. We would meet
Mhm.
monthly, and I could not tell you, Karen, after 3 or 4 years, one thing that committee did. I couldn't name a single thing that we did. We couldn't even decide what kind of committee we were. Were we an advisory committee or a policy-making committee or a venting committee or a safe space? Like, so for 3 or 4 years. And so I reached this breaking point where I just said, okay, this is not a great use of my time.
Mhm.
And so what would it look like if we changed the locus of control? And this, I am obsessed with locus of control.
Okay.
That what if I put myself in a space where I know that I can affect change?
Mhm.
And so for me at Baldwin Wallace, that space was in the faculty space. And so with a colleague, we created the faculty
Dick.
DEI, diversity, equity, and justice.
Oh.
Yes, we changed the metaphor.
I thought you were gonna say you created the
Yeah, we
faculty
created
dick.
the faculty dick. Yeah, that's how I get fired. I so anyway, what Frankenstein thing does that sound like? And so we've done more in a year and a half than has been done, I'm going to easily argue, in well over a decade, because we know that on the faculty diversity, equity, and justice committee, we don't have to consult anyone else to make decisions about the curriculum. So diversity in the curriculum, diversity in hiring, and diversity in professional development. As opposed to, sure, I'm annoyed that all of the orientation leaders are white, but I, as a professor of education, have no power over the orientation leaders. So me sitting in a space and like stewing about the fact that they're all white or the RAs are white or whatever it might be, that doesn't serve any utility because that's not in my locus of control.
Mhm.
That's kind of how I feel about, for me, making this huge pivot to the Buckeye Flame. I tell anybody who will listen, the Buckeye Flame is the most important thing I've ever done in my life. That's to date. It is the most important thing I've ever done in my life. Now, I had a nationally syndicated radio show, which I thought was pretty awesome. I wrote for the Huffington Post for years and years and years, and those were cool. It was cool to talk about national issues, but there was no real way to gauge whether I'm having any effect whatsoever.
Mhm.
As opposed to something like the Buckeye Flame. And, we are standing as Ohio's only LGBTQ publication and being able to track the actual impact and
Mhm.
see, it's not just that we wrote this story, but this trans voice clinic had to triple their enrollment because of the story.
Mhm.
This, I always kind of, whatever that motion is, my body posture, because I hate that this is something that I talk about, but the end result is still good. I hate that we have to talk about Tierra Marie Lewis, who was a murdered Black trans woman here in Cleveland, whose name was not on any registries, national registries for Trans Days of Remembrance, commemorations across the country. And then after we wrote about her in the Buckeye Flame, her name appeared there. I make that motion because it's like, oh, what a shitty reason for someone's name to appear because they're murdered. But her name, given the outcome, needed to be said in the same space that other names were being said. So being able to connect my writing and the whole work of the Buckeye Flame to actual impact is endlessly inspiring
Mhm.
But as you said, it's also endlessly activating. And
Yeah.
that pressure is, I wish I could do the breakdown of the percentages of what pressure I'm putting on myself. It's not 100. I really do encounter pressure from people who say, why isn't this being covered? And so it's not totally just in my head of like, I'm pressuring myself to get this done.
Mhm.
I've gotten a lot better at not feeling like it needs to get done within the hour.
Yeah.
Then you have things that do. You have things like, hey, you're making plans to go attend a protest where there's going to be armed white nationalists. No, I want to put this together in the next hour to dissuade you from doing this.
Mhm.
I don't want that. So it's not just me, though. I do think I put a lot of pressure on myself to get content out there, because the conflict isn't just with conservative policies that are denying the lived experience of LGBTQ Ohioans. It's also from other media outlets
Mhm.
that are presenting this information in really damaging way, like actual damage, like
Yeah.
you're causing actual harm through your dead naming, through your both sidesing. Like we must present the pro side of conversion therapy. No, you don't.
Nope. You
There's
don't.
not a medical or psychological organization in the country who says that this thing works. And all of them agree that not only does it not work, it doesn't change anyone's sexual orientation or gender identity, but it actually does harm and increases depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation. Why do you have to present the pro side to this? So I feel
And
all
like the
the
people
pressure.
like who are running these generally are recovering themselves. And then we hear stories of how they got out of it and then go have families with their gay lover.
Right. And we just saw that with this huge Mother Jones expose on these 2,600 leaked emails that
Ugh.
prove that there's this cabal, this secret cabal of ultra right-wing conservative kingmakers who are determining all of these anti-trans policies. And those emails were leaked from a former detransitioner,
Mhm.
right? An individual who identified as trans and then was questioning their journey, and in the questioning of their trans journey was co-opted by this cabal, and now is in a space where they identify as trans. And so
Mhm.
people are on these journeys, but the cabal is just looking to use them wherever they can. So yeah, there I throw myself into some of these conflicts because I think it's important that we cover them quickly.
Yeah.
Uh, and my inbox is disgusting. There are so many things that I'm not getting to, and that part's been really hard for me, of people expressing their disappointment, like actual disappointment that we haven't covered the thing that they want covered. But
Well,
that's
I won't stay there because that's a small violin that people
yeah,
can
yeah,
play. But I do wanna lean into the conversation around when to address things. I think as many liberals, I'm not a liberal, but as many liberals and Democrats we're seeing in this space, it's a very reactive space right now. And I am solely interested in proactive ways. I would love to get some legislature or a bill signed around codifying that only experts can write bills about certain things, like, right? So I'm like, I'm and that's just a thought, a floating thought that I
right.
would love for somebody to pick up that writes bills that is in the house. But like, um how do you decide, what you're gonna engage in and what you're gonna be a part of? Because right now what I'm clear on is that silence and ignoring it and hoping it will go away. This is a lot of language that was used in Jim Crow laws that has been converted to speak directly to anti-trans laws. But it's really some copy and paste stuff. And a lot of times when people were like, that goes back to white supremacy, people were like, well, how? And we're like, well, there's black trans people. So like there's some of those conversations, but like how do you figure out, especially with your different identities and demographics personally, how do you decide what to engage in and what to not engage in, other than texting me and asking and not taking my advice?
Yeah, I think my main method is to text you and ask you, and then just
Mhm.
not, take your advice. No, that part's hard. I don't know that I have a recipe for that one necessarily. When look, one of the things that the pandemic has made really easy for us is to these school board meetings being online, these
Mhm.
council meetings being online. I spent a good hour and a half this morning watching a school board meeting that I'm going to be writing about later tonight.
Mhm.
I still have 2 hours left to watch, but I was never going to go that couldn't tell you where that municipality even is. I think it's far.
Right. Mhm.
And so being able to be at capacity, right? Like that's a big piece of, oh, okay, we can watch a video and write about this video. Because I want to back up a step. The easy part is, and what's been really freeing for me is that I think I struggled a really long time at figuring out what my activism was. This is my activism,
Mhm.
right? Like this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm supposed to be amplifying these stories, but then it's exactly what you're asking, because I certainly have my own biases. And
Right.
so somewhere in here, a lot of places in here, I am subjectively deciding which stories get covered.
Mhm.
Um, and we get hit up for a lot of stories that I'm like, I just don't think the evidence is there for that one. We had one where a couple weeks ago where there were some drag artists who had written in and they were alleging that another bar was trying to take them down. And okay, there wasn't really any
That's a
evidence.
Facebook post, right? Like
Exactly.
that's not an article.
But it took a while to really get to that point. One of the things we struggled with at the beginning of the Buckeye Flame was, is it an LGBTQ Ohio story, right? So we are relentlessly and predictably and obnoxiously on brand. We only write about LGBTQ Ohio. It's not to say that there aren't things happening in Florida, because
Mhm.
there are horrible things happening in Florida and horrible things happening in Kentucky and Tennessee and all around, but we don't have the resources to cover all those. We have the resources to cover LGBTQ Ohio. So
Mhm.
that's where we start. Then we got into the space of, is it an LGBTQ Ohio story if an LGBTQ Ohioan is behaving badly?
Mm.
So remember I can't remember her name, the woman who was the president of the city council in Cincinnati.
Yes.
I totally blanked on her name, which is fine. But she was doing bad stuff. I mean, there was a lot of malfeasance. And that was a big question of, okay, is this an LGBTQ Ohio story? Is it because
Because she was gay.
she is, right? And she
Right.
actually was probably uh, the most powerful lesbian in the state in terms of elected office. And we ultimately decided, yeah, that's not something that really affects going back to culture. It's
Mhm.
not something that really reflects the community. And so I think we've wrestled with that a lot
And
of,
that was like in
yeah.
proprietary funds. It was actually one of my friend's former partners, so I'm gonna continue not to say that name. But like I think it was like improper funding, right? And receiving improper funds or misallocating funds, I guess, or being a part of some backyard deals or
Is
whatever.
that a gay story?
No,
Yeah.
no. And I think it also speaks, if we're talking nuance, I think it also speaks to like, okay, well, what does she feel she had to do to get access to resources, power, and influence in that role that maybe would not have been afforded under regular means, or like if she would have taken the high road or done something like that? And it was presented to her as business opportunities. I think she actually went to jail.
Yeah, I don't know if you know this, she brought to her swearing in, because I have a picture of it, a folding chair,
Yeah.
because that was her whole, not slogan, but it was one of her, part of her ethos was, there's going to be a lot of tables that I, as a Black lesbian, am just not going to be able to sit around. And so I'm
Mhm.
always going to bring a folding chair with me. So there's always a seat at the table. And so
Yeah.
your question of like, what did she feel she had to do? I think
Mhm.
was really important to how she moved through the world and how the world treated her. And so So we've had to wrestle with some of these questions of what it is that we cover. And we've also had to say, you know what, it sounds like you've been really wronged, but that story is beyond our capacity,
Well,
right? Like,
and like if you
yeah,
if you think about it from like because I have some rules around, especially, Black folks, like around not necessarily attacking character, right? We can attack and discuss behaviors and call people in or out accordingly. Um, but I have some rules around that around I try not to play with people's livelihood and I try not to address or attack their character. But definitely when we think of accountability, that has been a really challenging space to be in the integrity of journalism and the integrity. And we're not a newsroom, right? So we're also having those conversations. So I think it's been really, really nuanced and challenging and complex to try and figure out, what is our scope.
would we out a anti-gay politician? If we came
Oh.
across information, right? These are the things that we're struggling with. And you're seeing that right now with the lieutenant governor
Mhm.
of, was
But
it Tennessee?
people are gonna do that. Like, we don't have to be the ones to do that.
Exactly.
We don't have to be
Exactly.
the ones to do that. People are gonna schadenfreude all over the place, and they're gonna be super excited to see people, and we don't get off on that. Like, we don't get off on, like, people being harmed or getting found out. Like, there may be some momentary, like, well,
There it
here, like,
is.
who could have guessed that? This is my surprise face.
Right.
But I think it's also like that's not our role. Like, that's not our role to out anyone. That's not our role to misgender anyone. And a lot of times what I see in the community, and I love this conversation with you. A lot of times what I see in the community is us trying to implement methods of the oppressor, right? Or methods in the same context by calling names or outing them or doing things that we actually wouldn't want and that maybe harmed us in the first place. And I'm not a get you back type of person. I believe that if you can't find compassion or empathy or expertise to back or validate, whatever you're claiming or trying to do to me, or not even acknowledge the existence of certain people, then at that point, I feel like your heart is hurting in a way that I can't even touch. And that's not my job. Like the world's gonna do karma. People will say karma, but I think whether karma, I see karma or anything like that, I think your heart's gonna manifest, that pain that you're having, and you're not feeling free. If you feel like you have to restrict others in their existence just by existing freely, then that tells me that you're not free.
And I don't want to see that reflected vibe wise on our site, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think it's so key that I do think there's extra pressure on us. I think that there is extra pressure on an LGBTQ publication to be really above the drama, right? To be above that toxicity, because we're trying so hard to role model for other media outlets what it looks like to cover LGBTQ issues with grace and with depth and with education.
Hmm.
And with respect. So I think that's a big
Nuance.
piece, and with nuance. And and you and I have talked about this, and it is ever a struggle to not be trauma porn, right? We're not determining, in no way is the LGBTQ community determining the legislation coming out of the Columbus State House. We're just
Right.
not. And so we, as the Buckeye Flame, are right this second mostly reacting, and not reacting, but amplifying, like,
Hmm.
cool, you're going to try to pass this legislation, and yeah, it's only 11 words, but we're going to do an article about it. And that's what we did, this week. And thousands of people have clicked on it. And I get nervous, first of all, right? Like, we want to divorce impact from metrics. Like, those are
Hmm.
not exactly the same thing. For advertisers, metrics are important. It is important that we be able to say to people, hey, 6,000 people just clicked on this article today. That is important. Like, that
Right.
can't just be divorce, even as we want to talk about separate metrics. That said, when we're looking at metrics, it's not a great feeling when you look back at 2022 and see, oh, why was there this ridiculous spike in traffic? What happened that day? Let me, spread it apart. Oh, that was the Proud Boys article, right? Like,
Yeah.
so we want to make sure that we're doing what we can do. Now, the number 2 article was our Pride guide. And so that's nice to have that balance, right? To be able to say, because people just kept clicking on it because they're looking for that community. So I think part of the pressure is to make sure that we are balancing out our coverage of things outside of our control with happier stories that are within our control. And then once we're talking about that, there's only so much I can do to amplify issues of race coming out of the Columbus State House, because there's not that many issues of, like there's not that much empowerment that's coming out of the Columbus State House with regards to race. But where we do have control, again, locus of control, where we do have control are the stories, what we call evergreen stories, right? About the bakery, about the ice cream place, about,
The food truck.
entrepreneurs, right? Where we can raise up voices that are not often being heard. That's the challenge. And we just got to keep doing that better, honestly.
Would you say that not doing certain stories and not engaging in certain spaces or conversations is a form of self-care for you?
Yes and no. I don't want to in any way misrepresent that I have arrived at a place where there are still stories that I get sucked into that I think aren't good for me, honestly.
Yeah.
As you well know, I have an unhealthy obsession with with past Representative Gary Click, a
I
Republican.
hate that name's on here.
I know, but it's really this has kind of become an interesting piece for me. It actually used to be there's a guy named, I don't even want to put other names that are horrible on your podcast, but
Thanks.
it's a gay Republican who's very big on Twitter with hundreds of thousands of followers, who I would go back and forth with regularly. And I think that I get sucked into these sometimes because sometimes it's ego, right? Like a lot of times it's ego of, I really think that I can say a thing that's going to affect this person's train of thought. And it's complete horse shit, right? Like that's just not true. But I hope, I kind of hope. I'm also endlessly optimistic. But then there's also the part where
do you think, hold on.
Yeah.
Do you think that any of that has anything to do with saviorism? And like, if so, how are you unpacking that and addressing that or dismantling that within yourself?
Yeah, I mean, and going back to culture, a lot of that is connected to, now obviously it's connected to my copious amounts of white privilege as well. But I have to say, for me, it's a lot connected to Judaism.
Okay.
Because the culture of Judaism for me, there it is, Tikkun Olam. It's so funny to show, like, to prove a Hebrew thing by your tattoo that you're not supposed to have. So there's some dissonance there.
Nuance. All right, carry on.
Yeah. So do you know Tikkun Olam? Is that something that's come up for you before?
Maybe in concept, but I don't know that language specifically.
So Tikkun Olam is heal the world. And it's not just a Michael Jackson song. Wasn't it like the Free Willy song?
Yes.
Oh my God, I haven't thought about that in a while.
How did that even make it into that movie? Anyway,
who knows?
But
so it wasn't just, it's not just a catchphrase, it's actually a mandate. And it takes on, in Judaism, it takes on a whole different context when that heal the world becomes a mandate, when that saviorism becomes a charge. That's part of what we are supposed to do, is use our voice in the way that we know how to use it to make a difference. Tying that together with race and with privilege, right? That's where it gets really complicated.
Mhm.
But yes, I think saviorism is certainly a part of it, but it's also something that I was raised, it's not just that you're supposed to do that, you're derelict if you're not.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you for I love that part of the conversation because we've never in all of our advice giving and rejection of my advice, we've never really talked about kind of that cultural and upbringing piece or socialization piece because I will say this because I know that probably because we've mentioned this, we will probably get a lot of views. um so I do want to say my piece around that. At first, I was like, don't engage with this, Ken. Not in a you're better than that way, but in like there are other things that you can give and donate your time to and attention to and energy to. After the continuous onslaught of legislation, specifically by
Him.
Pastor Representative Gary Click, especially with that and the lack of um, willingness that he obviously has, and in hearing the actual lived experience of LGBTQ plus Ohioans, he'll go out of state to get people to talk to his points and won't
Yep.
talk to any Ohioans, and has just a history of um, really what I would say is, like manipulative and gaslighting behavior and un-Christ-like behavior, if you're asking me in my Pentecostal background and understanding of who God is and Jesus is and what God wants and represents and who God loves and how God cares for that. And just, redefining words and all of these things and manipulating those things for his bills and proposed bills for, whatever that looks like. My challenge was I have the privilege in my life at this time in my life at 40 to be able to engage in spaces that are only affirming to me. Um, it gets tricky when it's legislation because I work in advocacy, yes, but more so because now this is impacting my life and the laws and spaces that I've worked in terms of gender affirming care, and then also in my own identity of gender nonconforming and transness. And I think, there's a certain amount of protection that I have to do because so much of my work is based in race, because America can't seem to get past that and get in right relationship with that. And because I do so much work there, and I don't necessarily want to, but because I do so much work there, I'm just exhausted at this point with
Yeah.
the onslaught, and they just keep coming, and I don't even think people who are in power realize how much capacity they have for bullshit because they don't have to worry about their civil rights being attacked or their existence being questioned or wanting to be eradicated. Those are things that if you don't have to worry about that, like of course you're able to dream and live and exist and think up a bunch of shit about people, if you're interested in control and fear
Right.
mongering, those type of things. And so originally I would say to you, don't do that, don't engage there. But now I think that has shifted to, all right, well, take care of yourself, protect yourself, make sure that everything you have is documented and you have screenshots and you have receipts. And thank you. Thank you for taking on someone that I would hope to never be in community or conversation with, because I am dehumanized in that aspect. Do I think that the way that I engage, and when people are like, who's the culture of you audience, right? Like, I'm like people who are willing to engage. Do
Mhm.
I think that I could have a conversation, a pretty convincing argument? Do I think that I could be a acceptable gay and acceptable Black trans person to Representative Gary Click? Possibly. I actually possibly could if I had the capacity and wanted to do that emotional labor. I do not. I don't have any interest in doing that. So a lot of times I'm like, now the answer is not being quiet. The answer is not doing anything. And if you have a through line to communication, because y'all have this weird relationship and dynamic, if you have a through line to that and there can actually be discussion, then try. I'm gonna say try, because if you have an ear, then use that to hopefully amplify some actual statistics, some actual research, and some actual, ideology that is supportive for the people. And so that's a
Yeah.
place where I think I've definitely shifted in terms of allowing others to make their own choices, and not, because I was doing that out of protection for you, right? As my friend and someone in this work that I deem as a co-conspirator. And I think it is really challenging to make those decisions, because I sometimes I have to get off the internet because they're talking about me. You know what I
Right.
mean? And it's just like I can't be there today. Like, I got stuff to do. Like, I have to go and try to live and leave my own legacy and do this work of being influential to the city's, some of Columbus's biggest leaders. And I can't do that if I am, dissonant with the rhetoric that is happening in our legislature. And I've realized that can be its own, emotional hurt, pain, whatever you want to call it, fracture in
Mhm.
relationship that is really hard to reconcile. And the notion that I am prepared to, when I started working for Kaleidoscope, I was like, am I ready to die for
Mm.
this?
Ooh.
And that was a question. My dad had worked for the city in Columbus, and he did stuff in EEOC and some of those claims. And we had a conversation, and he was like, I'm proud of you. And I love that you're carrying on this legacy of work. And like, I'm worried for you. Like,
Mm.
I just care if you're safe. And he couldn't confirm or guarantee that. I can't confirm or guarantee my safety. And I know that the legislature and the bills that are being presented and discussed, and our identities being discussed as if they're dismissible. Like,
Yeah.
it's just so not even infuriating. It's just so dehumanizing.
Dehumanizing.
And
That's exactly what
so
I'm saying. Yeah.
and so like, in that way, like, there's some ways I can't engage with that, but I can't do anything but like appreciate that you're gonna, on days that you have capacity, engage there. Like, I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, I mean, God, geography. I was going to say geographic privilege. Geography, as it relates to LGBTQ privilege, for me is a fascinating thing, just because, right? So I wasn't out until I moved into New York City,
Mhm.
and it turns out, I don't even know if you know this, there's like a freaking ton of gay people in New York City, so that was pretty cool.
That
I don't
is
know,
surprising.
tourism.
Just kidding.
So
I knew
so
that.
yeah. So when I'm, I was not out in high school, and so when I moved into New York City, I came out pretty quickly and swiftly and with a vengeance. And so lived most of my life in New York City, and then the only other place I've lived is in Vermont. Well, New York City and Vermont are like LGBTQ mecca. Only in Vermont could I be called a Republican, which I was once, and I thought it was the most hilarious thing I'd ever heard. But that is like so quintessentially Vermont,
Mhm.
that it is so far left that I looked moderate, which was hilarious.
My
Um,
mom did call me a closet Republican at one point.
nice. I'm gonna
I was
start
like, just look at my voting records. You can actually pull them up.
calling. You can see it, Mom. So I think that having all of my formative LGBTQ experiences be in this uh, cocoon of LGBTQ safety, I think I've carried some of that with me back here, where I might be a little bit naive about some of the situations that I'm putting myself in,
Mm,
and the way that I'm putting myself out there. Like, we still do need to move some of the address that the Buckeye Flame is listed at, because it's still my home address. And so we just got to
why would
make
you
it's
why
got to
would you
make
tell people?
PO box, people, PO box. So it's all good. Everybody come over.
Send
So
something to the email, folks. Please do not go to Ken's house.
so except people send checks in school.
All
So
right.
I think that there, I think there is some of that, where I'm so used to New York City and Vermont that I remember when I was sitting here, I was sitting in this chair. I'm also like cognizant, because that's always my backdrop, that it's so interesting that my backdrop for all of these is something that's very in motion and is
Mhm.
not still, which is also part of my struggle. But I remember when I was sitting here when the pandemic had just started, and it was the first hearing the first
Mhm.
testimony that I really sat through is when the Buckeye Flame first started. And I think it was to ban trans youth from sports balls. And so like I think it was something like it was just something like it was, I think that was the first one I listened to. And it was a parade of pastors. And I remember just sitting here and I was inconsolable. I really
Mm.
was a mess because suddenly, do I know that horrible things are said about LGBTQ people? Sure. Have I heard them? Yes. But have I heard them knowing that it's the state where I live and the people who are saying it are like right over there? I mean, there was one that was representing an organization that is a couple blocks away. And that changed my frame a lot of like,
Mhm.
oh, wait a second. I left all of my legal protections behind in Vermont. All of my legal protections in employment, housing, public accommodations, I had all of those in Vermont. I
Mhm.
had all of those in New York City. And now I don't have, you're telling me I don't have any of those?
Right.
And so if Baldwin Wallace somehow decides to get rid of my tenure, which that'd be a thing, if they want to fire me for being gay, or if my cats want to kick me out of the house for being gay, or if my fictitious boyfriend and I get kicked out of a restaurant for being gay, that's a thing that can actually happen in this physical space where I live. I was a mess. I really, I was truly inconsolable. And so again, I know this is like my running theme. I had to shift the frame to that locus of control so that I knew I was going to have tons and tons more of these hearings. And I probably at this point, watched 30, 40 hearings, but I do it with a specific frame of listening for ridiculous quotes. And that's what I'm amplifying.
Mhm.
Like when they're going to say ridiculous things, great. That's what I'm going to amplify. It gives me something to grab onto so that I'm not just totally opening myself up to all of the harm that is actually coming at us, because it's
Mhm.
actually coming at us. They're saying horrible things.
And I
We
mean, growing up as a pastor's kid, it's so hard for me to hear those type of things because that is not who Christ is in my personal relationship with Christianity. And that is expanding, spiritually, but like my understanding of the Bible. And yes, I did read it. I have read it multiple times. I used to memorize it. I used to be in the Bible Bowl and I was very good at that. But like the manipulation of the text and also knowing that the text was like originally slave owners like text to
Yep.
justify their slavery and enslavement of folks is like it's just so gross. And the notion that when it became a 501(c) is when they started to try to integrate racially, and when they were like, oh, I get a tax break here, right, is when otherwise they would have been segregated. They would still be segregated. I mean, there's a lot of segregation happening now just because the politics are personal at this point, but yeah, like that there's a whole lot to unpack, and that's probably a whole nother podcast. But I think just knowing that there are influential folks who have, what the Bible would call sheep and a congregation to really influence, and that is what they're using it for when there is no evidence or facts of this, like of this, grooming that they speak. In the church is one of the primary groomers I've ever experienced in my
Yeah,
life. Oh my gosh, the unpacking and the church hurt that I've had to undo in my life is just so profound and something I'm still paying my out of pocket for my therapist for. So I think just this whole notion that that's who gets to lead in our government locally and who gets to write bills at will as they feel and make up stuff. And it's also like the integrity of journalism is struggling, right? So like I don't know how to recognize I can reconcile that. I think it definitely does come back to the locus of control, and I think that's a really good framework that I can continue to do, and I just continue to create affirming spaces for Black, queer, trans, gender nonconforming folks, and neurodivergent folks, and differently able folks, and I do that as much as I can, and that seems to be working for now, and that's the culture that I try to create. But it's not for a lack of like knowing that that exists. It's just like that's what I can control and that's what I can do.
that's it, right? That's what it is. And if you really, well, I'll speak from the eye, like when I open myself up in that way, it doesn't work out super well. Like when I just like, I'm just going to be open to this experience of hearing these horrible people say horrible things. And I start believing them. And some of them are ridiculous. Like when the pastor gets up there and says, LGBTQ people are going to hell. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to hell. Wait a second, I'm Jewish. I don't even believe in hell. Like that's not even.
Right.
And so I'm like, why am I internalizing things that don't even have anything to do with me?
It's
And
just a
so,
gross misuse of the Bible, to be honest.
but I do it, and it is, but I think that it works for a reason. And I think it in particular works when you don't have an anchor to grab hold of. Right? If
Mhm.
you are adrift, if you don't have a belief system that is
Right.
kind of guiding you, you are going to be more susceptible to it. I'm kind of fascinated by, we actually talked about this in class last Thursday night, the intersection of my two lives of the LGBTQ journalism and college student development theory, which is what I
Mhm.
teach. And so I did go back because I was kind of curious. Okay, so you got this guy and he's a pastor and he's a representative, and like what college did you go to, if any? Just curious. And so I have gone back and looked at his college, and it's an unaccredited college. And it is the most fascinating, like
Ah,
how have you and I never talked about this?
I think
They
we did. I forgot that until
oh
this moment. ADHD helps me forget things and it's always a
fascinating.
surprise. You're getting my initial reaction right now because I forgot
I
that.
love it. So this is a school that has no accreditation. And I actually, part of my professional life is that I'm an accreditor. I actually travel around to different colleges and work on their accreditation. And so his school is not accredited. And the handbook bans complaining. The handbook bans shopping with the opposite sex. The handbook actually says that elected officials are there through divine appointment.
That's white nationalism.
No kidding. And so I do think to find where did this grooming happen, it's so last week, let me kind of land that plane of there's a new bill that the Ohio legislature is introducing, and actually you and I have not talked about it, but
Oh, man.
a new bill that would require that all professors syllabi be online and searchable with their biography attached to the syllabus. That would ban any type of mandatory DEI on college campuses. It would ban things like a diversity statement. Baldwin
Yeah.
Wallace, part of what the DEJ did was we said from here on out, there's going to be, if you're going to
Mhm.
apply to a faculty role, you write a diversity statement, how it informs your pedagogy. That would be banned, and a required history course with like 5 of the Federalist Papers and the Emancipation Proclamation, like this
Yeah.
unbelievable thing. And so the theory behind Republicans proposing that bill is that colleges and universities right now are grooming students for liberalism. Okay. On the flip side, you have places like where Pastor Representative Gary Click went to school that are clearly grooming this outcome,
Mhm.
right? They don't need to ban homosexuality in their student handbook because there's not even a subtle
They can't be
acknowledgement that that's a
friends.
possibility, right? Yeah.
And there's
So,
so much activity going
uh,
on in those spaces coming from someone who taught and went to evangelical high school. It's so much mess going on in there. Like, clean up your house. Clean up your house. Like, honestly, there's so much going on in there, and there's so much repression, and there's so much you know, hurting and grooming. And I would just say, like, to that, you've landed the plane in my eyes. And thinking about this bill, like, there is, and people are like, oh, it's a conspiracy theory. Like, no, there is literally an attack on liberalism, on free thinking, on
yep.
thought. There is a power play for control and more dominance and hierarchy and oppression. And it is not a coincidence. It is not without strategy that they have long-term incrementalist put into place. And I wish that if there's one thing that I could, you know, impart into liberals and Democrats is like, their plan is actually solid. Now, the people who are executing that plan, there are some gaps. That's all I'm gonna say. There are some gaps. But as far as their plan, the plan is solid. They're executing it swiftly at this time, more swiftly than ever before. And everybody's so reactive and so activated and triggered that we are not willing, we can't keep playing defense in this way, and not in a way that doesn't center the dignity of human lives. We have to still center the dignity of the most historically oppressed, because at the end of the day, us turnabout as fair play is not going to work. Like, that's not going to work. We actually have to imagine new policies that actually let people be in their lanes and be in their scope of expertise. And if we could start there, then I think we could have better examples, because right now we're on a gerbil wheel of defense and defending our expertise, research, and actual like knowledge and education and history. And we cannot shape and reshape history in ways that just isn't true. Like, we cannot do that. And like, that is the importance of storytelling. That is the importance of the Buckeye Flame. That is the importance of our work as facilitators, is to continue to amplify voices that aren't historically heard or requested. And like, what does that mean to honor the dignity of the lives of the people that don't have voice and don't have platforms and don't have influence and don't have power and don't have access to resources?
Yep. Yeah, and to get away from some of that respectability politics of like, it can't just be, and here are the three gays that we put in front of the camera because they are the most palatable. You know, my hero organization is always going to be ACT UP. Because I didn't even ask if we can cuss on this. Can we cuss on this? Was this a cuss?
I told you to cuss on this. Go
Oh,
ahead.
all right.
We've said bullshit. We said
okay,
bullshit.
cool. Yeah, so ACT UP fucked stuff up, right? Like, they were like, oh, wait, we're legit dying. And we're legit dying, right? I mean, talk about an elevator pitch. Silence equals death. There's not a better one than that. It's pretty clear. That's a sense of urgency right there. And so we are going to chain ourselves to the stock exchange, and we're going to chain ourselves to Pfizer or whatever the drug, you know, whatever it might be. And because we have to be disruptive, because the current way of doing these backroom politics is not working. And we know that in Ohio, that is one of the tracks. That's one of the LGBTQ approaches, is let's cultivate these relationships so that we can talk to them behind the scenes and tell them, hey, you should say this at this moment. And it's like, and there is a place for that. And I think it's super important. What I've struggled with, I had this conversation with a state representative a few years ago and said, okay, but what do you want people to do? So we will publish this article and we will amplify this thing that you're working on, but what can readers do? And the answer I got back from the state representative was they can just trust that it's in our hands.
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. Well, that's just not, that's ridiculous. And I have gotten that answer from other LGBTQ. You know, one of my big struggles at the end of last year was when the trans sports ban didn't pass, when some of our colleagues were like, victory, victory. And I'm kind of, but it wasn't. And a national blogger with hundreds of thousands of followers put huge LGBTQ victory in Ohio. And I saw the headline. I'm like, wait a second.
When?
I'm like, what did I miss? Because that's probably bad if I missed it. It's almost like I run a publication. And it was that this thing didn't pass, but it didn't pass for reasons that had nothing to do with us. It didn't. Now, the end result is it didn't pass. So yay. But we can't say, well, what did we learn from that? We learned that the Republicans couldn't agree on homeschooling, which is the actual reason that the LGBTQ trans youth sports ban didn't pass. There's no lesson for us, except if we're just going to like run around saying this is a danger to homeschooling, which it wasn't. So, you know, why don't you want me out there screaming my head off? Maybe in the worst case scenario, I look not palatable, which makes you who are doing backroom things look more palatable. That's great too. But I just, it can't all be backroom politics. There has to be protests, and there have to be us out there saying exactly what you said before, just about like there's so many people who just don't understand what it means to not have these protections and to be fearing, to have actual fear. And let me just add the last piece of nuance to this, like the nuance of when we get that pressure of go cover this armed thing.
Mhm.
No,
Am I gonna put myself at risk there?
no, I'm
No,
not.
no.
That's
And
the
if we
thing.
diversify our staff, and as we continue to diversify our staff, are we really gonna put Black folks, queer
No.
folks on the front lines there? No.
So there's a lot swimming around, and I think that for me, and I sit with that. I actually really, I mean, I'm appreciative for all my time with you, but I'm appreciative for inserting self-care into the mix. I do think I've gotten better.
Yeah.
But I think that's been a journey. I'm not staying up, all hours finishing something because I have to get it out there before Cleveland.com gets it out there.
Mhm.
But I do feel the weight of all the things that we're not covering.
I feel that, and I can honestly say I've watched you relax some of your internalized time constraints to get the appropriate story and the appropriate amount of evidence, facts, research, whatever is necessary to get the right story. That has been the focus. And
The
as a
way we
president of the
tell it.
Buckeye
Yeah.
Flame, I'm proud. I'm proud of that. And I really care about, your health and wealth. And I'm going to constantly be in your ear like, okay, and is there anything that we can do? Can we slow this down a little bit more? Can we slow this down a little bit more to make sure it's right, to make sure we have the right voices at the table and in the conversation? And can we make sure that you are safe and your staff is safe, and we are moving in the right direction, and we are also providing possible tangible solutions or ways to get involved. So that's important. And I really appreciate that conversation. I know there's a lot more that we can continue to talk about, and we will, in episodes to come for sure. But I do want to finish with a situational hot seat. This is my favorite part of the podcast. I'm just going to give you more advice that you won't take. But let's get a situation in the mix, one that I don't know about. We talk a lot, so this is going to be interesting. But give me a situation that you're wondering how I would approach it, and then we'll hear how you approached it and maybe how you would have approached it differently. It can be theoretical, and we can talk about in theory what you would do at this time in this moment in your life. But it can be theoretical or real or a combination of both. And throw a situation at me so I can give you advice that will be discarded.
I would like to say that I accept one out of every 3 of advice.
Fair. Okay, that's a good ratio. I like that. That puts some context around
I
it.
don't want people to be like,
They're like, why are you in this relationship with this person? Like, what are you doing, Karen?
This does
No.
not sound like right relationships. Um,
Oh, just so y'all know that are listening and don't know me and Ken's relationship, there is a term called right relationship that Sonia Renee Taylor uses. And he likes to play with me about right relationships because it was an article written about my work that I do, and they used right relationships. And that was not what I said. It is right relationship, and you need to make sure you're in right relationship with the earth. Look at climate change, with people, with community, with organizations, with the systems. Like, you need to be in right relationships with these things. And I mean, the right relationship with the system is hopefully to dismantle it and make it more affirming. But all that said, to say that he keeps fucking with me about right relationships, and I keep playing with him too. So it's fine. 1 in 3. There's a reason why I still engage with this man. So we are good. Just know that. And we are in right relationship, which is why we can have these conversations and talk shit to each other. So there's that. And you are the person, you get an award for making me cuss the most on a podcast. Congratulations. Give me the damn situation.
My hypothetical is about stuff that's happening in your own house. And by that, I mean within our own culture.
Okay.
And
Columbus, Ohio LGBTQ culture, or
we're going to say LGBTQ culture. And so
Columbus or Ohio?
Ohio, when
Okay.
there's drama within the LGBTQ community, to what degree do you feel the responsibility, knowing that if this drama, our internal bickering,
Mhm.
of which there is,
Mhm.
if that if it were to get out, it would not make us look as professional as we are. I'm going to say as we are.
Mhm.
I'm centering around, I'm orbiting around kind of this idea of what responsibility you feel to keep our drama within our community and not let other people find out about it.
I love this question.
Like
I love
sometimes we're
this.
sometimes we're in that space too with
Mhm,
like allies, right? And I
mhm.
didn't mean to say that word the way I did, but I didn't put air quotes, but like right, but like
Ugh,
we're you know
allies.
we're allies. No, but we're in this space with allies, and I'm kind of like, all right, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I just don't even want to say the thing because it's different when we're talking in
Sure.
community. And I don't want, I might go back to earlier when I was talking about this increased sense of pressure that I feel about our appearances. But,
Mhm,
and in some ways, and this last thing I'll say is about what we've discussed about, calling out and calling in. And I'm kind of
mhm.
curious how that plays into this too. I feel
Sure.
a sense of pressure to keep our drama in community.
I really, really love this situation in theory. Let's go from a macro to a
Yeah, yeah.
micro space. In the macro space, like thinking about community, I'm raised in the Black house, right? Where you don't take this outside.
Mm.
I think there is, and this is just a statement around storytelling and truth telling.
That's
I
a
think,
Jewish thing too, by the way. That's a
okay,
Jewish
cool.
thing too.
I
Yeah,
know
yeah.
it's a lot of my people of color friends. I would say Latine. I have some Iranian and Persian friends, first generation folks. They're like, that's absolutely culturally what we do and how we believe. And I think there is a element of shame, and that is like leading us in those spaces, right? And so there is some nuance to storytelling and truth telling and still honoring the dignity of those folks. Like when
Mm.
our parents leave, how do we talk about them in ways that honor the fact that they survived enough to get us here, raise us, and send us on our way, right? Like how can we acknowledge that in community? Around the LGBTQ plus stuff, I have similar concepts of that, and so there are some things that I don't do. And these are just some of my own rules around engagement in that. If I am in a relationship with that person or a group that's happening, I will possibly call people in. If I feel like there is an opportunity for repair, or like if harm is actively happening, right? Like if harm is actively happening, I'm going to disrupt and interrupt in the ways that my
Sure.
influence and power calls for, because I do have influence and power in especially Columbus, but now more seeing seen throughout the state. I have influence and power in LGBTQ plus spaces, or as a representative of the Black LGBTQ plus community, right? And so I think it's important to note that that is influence and power that I have, and with that I think comes responsibility. So if that means I have a lot of conversations on the phone or in person or through Facebook Messenger or all of those things where I'm like, I think there's another way, like something
Mm.
else is possible, or I think that, let's look at both sides. Let's look at your contribution to this. Let's look at what it would mean to be in right relationship with this situation or this person, or with this. And I've had to do a lot of calling in the community, and that definitely takes capacity, which goes back to rest. And do I have rest, and am I at capacity, or do I have room, right? And if I have room, then I can call people in, be in relationship, and hopefully they are willing to respect the fact that I took the time and attention and energy to call them in. Like, can they understand that that took work, and that actually means I care about the relationship, or I care about something here? I think there is also loving people at a distance. There are times for me that have nothing to do with me, and that in the scheme of big things in legislation, in harm or safety, like no one's going to be unalive because of this situation. And so I'm going to let them work that out. And my friends know to call me if they're willing to look at their contribution to the situation. I've built that up and that type of rapport with my friends. They know not to call me with some bullshit just to vent and like not take any responsibility or accountability. Accountability is huge for me. And
Yeah.
I've had to eat my own humble pie a lot of times around that. And so at the end of the day, like I hold that same standard for my friends. That's a clear expectation I hold for them. And so they also know not to call me with any mess that's gonna be ancillary, right? To the work that we're doing. Um, as far as like around race relations specifically, it's challenging because a lot of times a lot of these spaces that I'm in are very queer, but they're very white. And
Mm,
so I do have some affinity spaces around Black queerness, which is completely different from an all Black space, right? Like those are actually different affinity spaces. Um, and I just got back from like a Black queer trans retreat, and there was a lot of neurodivergence there. That's a specific subset of our demographic, and that was a beautiful space to be in. I really wish more spaces could look like that in terms of the created culture there and the space and room that's created. But if it's around white folks, I think I really have to be in relationship. And sometimes I'm like, get somebody else to do it. I'm
right.
not here to call in and work really hard to disrupt and interrupt harm in white spaces. I will call you to do it. I will ask other allies and accomplices and co-conspirators to be in that space because I'm at capacity and I am not doing any DEI 101. I'm not doing anything that my rules around the race stuff is I'm not doing anything where I have to prove that white supremacy is still
Right.
alive and well. And I'm
Right.
not doing anything where I have to prove my expertise in DEI or the consulting work that I've done or my expertise and background literally in diversity and inclusion and educational policy and leadership. I'm not convincing anyone that I'm an expert in those spaces. I'm not convincing anyone that my lived experience means that I can prove that and I'm articulate and well spoken and you should listen to me. Like I don't give a fuck who listens to me actually. People listen to me because of that and because of the integrity that I have. And
Right.
I'm going to always stand on the side of right. No matter who is talking to me or what they're talking about, I'm going to stand on the side of right. And you could be my family member. And if you wrong, you wrong. And I'm going to let you know like, well, I mean, this technically like this is correct. And you could say you could apologize for misgendering or you could apologize for this. You could take accountability for that, right? And so when we have those nuanced conversations, to me it all goes back to right relationship. It all goes back to the notion of accountability and putting your ego down and being willing to hear the impact versus your good intentions, the impact of what is happening. And I've been in those situations too, where I had to listen to the fact that I impacted someone in a certain way. And that doesn't mean that we're still friends now or whatever, but that does mean that I took the time to listen to the impact. And then I had to make a decision about how I was going to repair that relationship or let it be. Sometimes there is the reality. And I think a lot of times in my relationships with white folks, they have this need to center their hurt and their pain for hurting me. And I'm like, let's look at the behavior.
Right.
And I'm not actually talking to you as a person who is harmful. I'm saying this behavior was harmful. And let's look at this behavior and why you continue to do it. And let's stop this behavior. Because if you stop this behavior, then I know for a fact that you're listening to me and you're hearing me. And if I continue to have situations where this continues to happen, like repair is not available and I can love you from a distance.
Right.
Right. And so, like, how have I, in situations where I've harmed or created challenge or tension or something like that, how can I correct that and repair that? Do I want to repair that? And how much energy and time am I willing to give to that? And sometimes there's the disappointment of the fact that like this is irreparable, this relationship is irreparable, or this situation has caused some permanent damage, and that can exist. And I think that can exist as humans. And it's really hard to know that some of these relationships, some people I was very close with 4 years ago before the pandemic started, I'm not close with them anymore because this pandemic has revealed so much and the politics are personal now. And so there's no, oh, I still go to this place that is openly anti-LGBTQ plus or not affirming, or oh, I voted for this person that is openly anti-Black or anti-LGBT. I can't do that. Like I can't have those relationships, and that can be okay. And I'm probably Facebook friends with some of them still. And we just, agree to coexist in that space because I'm not really a big blocker. I don't have time. I don't even look back at my photos or my videos to remember what I posted. People are like, you said this. I'm like, I don't remember that. So at the end of the
That was
day, for me,
hours
it's
ago.
hours ago. Like what? I've done 8 things since then. I've been on 7 podcasts since that
Seven.
moment. But I think it's really important to, and I'm kind of ranting, but I'm
I
all
love
hyped.
it.
You have me all hyped up. But like I think it's important to sit with things. Sometimes no response is a worthy response. I have to regulate myself. If I'm activated, I'm going to make a reactive and possibly protective response. And so when I'm grounded, trying to make decisions and move from that space, because my rage might even be righteous, but that doesn't mean that that's how I should show up and be present in those situations. And so I just really try to focus on myself, like healing whatever is hurt or harmed or dehumanized in me, and then addressing it. And if I want repair, seeking repair. And if I don't, like, the hardest thing I think for me is being okay with that that's not repairable and that I don't want to be in relationship with that person or that situation anymore.
Mm, I want to
What
push a
would
little.
you do, kid?
Well, no, because I kind of want to. Can I push a little bit? Because
Go for it.
so then, just to me, what about the next level? So if there is drama, in-group drama, do you feel pressure to present a united front, like an LGBTQ united front to more straight audiences, a more united Black front to white audiences, like for communities that are already for majority communities that are already looking at LGBTQ communities or Black communities
Mhm.
looking for issues.
Mhm. No, I don't feel any pressure to do that. I may have a few years ago, honestly, even within the last couple years in the pandemic, definitely exasperated some of that. But as far as me, like I'm in my integrity. If I'm in my integrity, I'm in my bag.
Mm,
And at the end of the day, um, pressure from who? Like the community, if we're in conflict, I guarantee people at the end of the day, whether they're, and I even like watch drama happen on social media. I'm not engaging there. I can't, it's not generative for me.
right.
It is not life-giving for me. It is not affirming for me. And I touch what I can touch. And I also like have found so much healing and relief from not allowing that self-imposed pressure to say anything. I am a truth teller, absolutely. But if I can't speak truth to power in a positive way or amplify or shift the narrative in a way that amplifies and lifts up those people, then it's not, first of all, it's not time to talk about it on social media. I do my healing in private,
Mm,
and then when it's time to discuss it, I could be like, yeah, there's some nuance. I was with, people like that don't know a lot about Columbus, and they were like, oh, I want to come to Columbus Pride. And I was like, just know there's a history of this,
mm,
and so yes, I will give the facts and articles and stuff like that, but I'm not going to um derail. I'm not going to attack anyone's character. Back to that livelihood. Like I'm not going to um, you know, explode or discuss anyone's methods. Everybody's methodologies and mechanisms and ideologies are different. Um, I I'd love to be an active abolitionist, but I can't live in a world that I don't see a way out of, or I can't imagine a way out of. And I just know that it's not going to go from having police to not having police. That is not our track. And so I'm a realist, so I have to sit in like, here's the reality. And so when I think of that, the pressure for me is to be in my integrity and to make sure that I am contributing to the joy, the rest, the wellness, and the equity that is available for Black folks, for queer folks, for people of color, for first generation folks. Those are the people that I am committed to uplifting and amplifying and celebrating. And I have to stay there. if I lose sight of that, when you talk about locus of control, if I lose sight of that, then I can spiral, I can be dissonant, I can lose
That's big.
everything that I work for. And I work too hard to build relationship and community to blow it on some drama or some mess or something where I'm like, let me talk about this. Like, no, I have enough conversations, not necessarily behind closed doors, but I have enough conversations in the right container that I think are productive, are healing, are reparative. And that's where that's where I'm gonna keep my focus and my energy. My calendar's already full. Like I don't have time for that mess that is like, well, y'all need to go to therapy, or like,
Right.
y'all need a mediator. Y'all need somebody who that's above my pay grade. Like that. I don't feel any pressure to do that. I also believe the Buckeye Flame is here to do a lot of these things. I also do believe that some of the people that are in advocacy and in this work are actively working on these things. And so how can I support them in their efforts? Is it sending money? Is it amplifying an article? Is it putting them on my podcast? Like what is the way or the method that I can do to amplify the stories and the narratives, even knowing that people have sordid and complicated pasts,
Yeah.
and relationships. That's where my pressure is, in making sure I'm telling the truth and making sure I'm in my integrity. That's the pressure that I have for me. Fuck all the other noise, to be
Yeah.
honest.
I could be better at that.
I mean,
I,
you have your role and it's
yeah.
evolving. And so just, I would just say give it room to evolve. But I think there is something to be said about, you know, your mandate as a person from Jewish culture. Your mandate, there it is. And your mandate, as a journalist and as a professor of education and a culture creator, I think it's really important to know your non-negotiables and to know your value system and to know, where you're aligned and where you're not, and to put your energy there. And if it shifts for you, like sometimes stuff happens and you're like, oh, like, I mean, I've lost a lot of people, throughout the pandemic, and like, is this a life or death thing in 5 years? Is anybody going to know what this is about? No, like I think we're in a very significant time in history right now, especially around all the legislation. So they will
Right.
know about what I did, and with the 2020 protests, like they'll know how I participated there. And so I just have to keep using my voice in the ways that make sense to me and that are truthful and in my own integrity. And that's where I have to focus.
And just ways that yield me more dates.
I hope so. I really hope somebody talks and they're like, you know what?
I heard that guy.
I heard that guy. He has some good things to say. His radio voice is stellar. I'm sure we'd have great phone
I say that all the time.
conversations long
I mean,
distance.
that is, and it's always moving towards that. Like, I think I'm a good writer. I'm a fine professor. Radio is like, that's my jam. That's what I do. That's just this interacting in this way is what feeds me almost more than anything else.
Well, I'm so glad you've been able to spend time with me. We will
Well,
have to come back to this. I have some people who are going to be circulating guests per season. Apparently I have 26 episodes per year. So we'll get you on there once a year, as it keeps going.
2025 is our year.
Yeah. But no, thank you so much for your time, energy, and attention. You bring up some really great points. I really hope that you can, keep finding your way in this work, because it's so vital and important to the work that we're doing and to the future leaders that get to be under your tutelage, and
Mhm.
also to the community that hopefully feels seen, heard, and valued and affirmed. I hope so, based on some of those articles that you write and the culture of the Buckeye Flame. Obviously, I care about it. I'm on the board, and I'm happily on the board, and I'm happy to be a part of it. But thanks, bestie.
You're the best. I appreciate you.
All right, we'll talk soon.